They came for his friend at first light. Arzan Eizaguirre had been counting ewes on the high meadow when he heard the wrong kind of hoofbeats. 8 horses. Heavy shod. The cattlemen's gait, not the miners', not the cavalry's. He felt the sound before he understood it. The way his body had learned to read the land across 31 years of trusting nothing but his own 2 legs and the long hazel staff that had walked the Pyrenees with him before it walked Nevada. He had been alone on the range for 11 weeks, in the high country north of the Humboldt, on a stretch of grass that the cattlemen in the valley below had spent 3 seasons trying to take from him. A man named Tomás Ruiz, also from the old country, also from the province of Basque, had been left with him for company, but Tomás had fallen sick 2 days before. He lay in the low hut on the meadow's edge, coughing into a wool blanket, and Arzan had tended him with the same steady patience he used to tend a ewe that was going to lamb in a storm. Now the riders had come, and Arzan had not heard Tomás try to rise. He had heard, instead, a quick scuffle outside the hut, the sound of a man on the ground, and a single voice that said, "Tell the foreigner to bring the staff and walk out. Tell him slowly." The dust had not yet settled when a second voice answered. Quiet. Tired. The voice of a man who had already decided he would die. "Aaron," said Tomás, and the name came out in the old Basque way, soft on the throat. "Do not come out. Please, do not come out for me. Before we ride further into Arzan's night, settle in wherever you are right now. Tell us in the comments where you are listening tonight, and if you have ever watched over something you were afraid to lose. We love knowing who is with us out on this range. Settle back in. The story is just beginning." Arzan stood very still. He was 56 years old. He had tended sheep in this country for 31 of those years, and every one of those years he had been mocked for the long curved staff he carried, for his accent, for the prayers he murmured in Euskera, a language no one west of the Mississippi could place, for the beret he wore through every kind of weather because it kept the high sun off the back of his neck and reminded him of his mother's kitchen. The cattlemen in the valley below called him the foreigner with the stick. Their children called him worse. Their dogs had been taught to bite his sheep on sight, and the foreman had laughed about it afterwards, the way men laugh when they have decided another man is small. Arzan was not small. He had simply chosen, a long time ago, to be quiet about how much room he took up in the world. He put down the tin cup he had been holding. He picked up his maquila, the long hazel staff he had carved himself from a tree he had found in the foothills above the Carson River 15 winters before. It was the same length he was. It had been bent by steam and seasoned by fire. Across its grain he had cut, in the old way, the mark of the house of Eizaguirre, an 8-pointed star in the wheat sheaf, the same mark every Eizaguirre boy was taught to carve before he was taught to write. He had been told, when he was a boy in the granite village where the house of his father had stood since before the railroad, that a man who carries his name on his staff will never be far from his own people. He had believed it less and less over the years, less every spring he walked alone up into the high country, less every autumn he walked alone back down, until one October night in 1883, when he had been called by telegram to a hospital in Carson City and had stood in a white room holding a folded sheet and had understood that the mark on the staff was not a tether. It was a memory, but he still carried the staff. The staff had nothing to do with believing anymore. The riders had stopped now, in a half circle at the edge of the meadow. Arzan could see 8 of them, then 8 collars, then 8 sets of eyes that meant his death. At their head, on the gray horse whose hooves were seconds late on every step, was Hollis Crown. Crown was not a man who liked to explain himself. He liked outcomes. He was the man who had bought the whole south side of the valley in 3 summers. The man who had put a tin roof on the courthouse and a new rifle in the sheriff's hand. The man who did not lose water rights because he was the water. He wanted the high meadow now. He wanted it because the railroad men had promised him a contract for 10,000 lambs by the spring of 1888, and the only grass tall enough to fatten that many lambs was the grass Arzan was standing on. Crown had sent word, twice, that the foreigner should move his flock down to the salt desert for the season. The first time, he had sent a letter written in the rounded hand of a clerk who had never been within 100 miles of a sheep. The second time, he had sent his cousin Jeb, who had cracked a herder over the head with a stock whip at a water trough in Elko and laughed about the sound it made. The sheep wars were not a metaphor out here. They were a memory that the cattleman kept, the way a man keeps a knife on the wall of his kitchen. Now Crown had come himself, because the meadow was worth more than a letter and worth more than a cousin. Crown dismounted slowly. He was wearing a coat that cost more than Arzan's entire flock had sold for in any of the last 3 seasons. He carried no rope, and that was the warning. A rustler who comes with a rope is a man who wants what you have. A rustler who comes without one wants you gone in a way that won't be argued. Crown said, "Your friend is going to die, Mr. Eizaguirre. You understand that, I expect." He sent his hand forward through the dust, the palm open, the way a man shows a horse it does not need to be afraid. "Bring the staff out here. Lay it on the ground. Walk past my men, and you can keep your life. Then we will discuss the flock." Arzan did not move. He understood what the open palm meant. He had grown up around cattle. He understood what a man who had already decided another man's death looked like, and he understood that Crown was not offering mercy. Crown was offering a way to be the one who handed the staff over. Crown wanted to make a foreigner beg, in his own language, in front of 8 men, because if a man would beg for his own staff, then everything else he owned would follow without a fight. From behind the hut, low and ragged, Tomás coughed. Then he said, in the old language, in the language no one in this valley would ever speak to him, "My father used to say that the staff belongs to the man who will not let go of it." Do you remember what he used to say? Arzan remembered. Pause with me here for a moment. Arzan is about to choose. Would you have walked out and laid the staff down? Or would you have done what he did? Tell us in the comments. We want to know which kind of courage you are carrying tonight. Arzan did not walk out. He walked to the side of the hut, slow, the way his father had taught him to walk past a cow that was thinking about charging. He lifted his hand once, briefly, toward Crown. It was not a wave. It was a thank you, and the only word it carried was the word for goodbye. He stepped into the doorway of the hut. He knelt beside Tomás, who was white and slicked with sweat. He placed his hand on Tomás's chest the way you place a hand on a door you are afraid to open. "Stay," he said in Basque. "Stay here. I will come back for you. I am asking you to stay." Tomás looked at him and nodded. He was 31 years old. He had been in this country for 9 months. He had a daughter he had not seen in 3 years. She was being raised by an aunt in a stone village whose name he would not let himself say out loud, because saying it out loud was the same as giving up the road back to her. He closed his eyes and began, very quietly, to pray to a saint whose name no one in this valley could pronounce. And he prayed in Euskara, and the prayer rose through the wooden roof of the hut into the cold morning air, and it was the most expensive prayer that had ever been said in this part of Nevada. Arzan rose. He stepped out of the hut. He closed the door behind him. He did not lay the staff on the ground. Crown's mouth went flat. He said, in a voice that did not rise, "You understand what this means." Arzan said, in his careful English, in the English he had learned from a schoolteacher in Reno who had taught him to be exact, "Year understand man." Crown turned to the man on his left and said, very softly, "Do what we came to do." They came in 2 waves. The first was 3 men on foot at the front of the line. They had rifles, and they had orders, and the orders were simple, and the rifles were aimed at Arzan's chest from a distance of 40 yards. Arzan waited for the first crack of the rifle, and when it came he was already moving, the staff out, the long curved hook at the top drawing down across the barrel of the rifle and pulling it sideways in a clean arc that took the man off his balance. The rifle went into the air. Arzan stepped into the next man, hooked the staff under the man's jaw, and lifted. Not broke. Lifted. The man's heels left the ground for a moment. Then Arzan set him down and stepped past him. The third shooter fired into the place where Arzan had been, hit one of Crown's own horses in the hindquarter, and was dragged off his stance. The horse screamed. The third shooter went down with his hand still on the trigger. Arzan did not look back. He was already running for the north edge of the meadow, where the land rose into a stone shelf and a line of pinyon pine that had been there since before the white men had come to the valley. He did not run because he was afraid. He ran because a man with a staff cannot stand against 8 rifles on open ground, no matter what stories his grandfather told. He needed the pines. He needed the broken ground. He needed the high meadow's own throat to help him choke the men who had come to take it. Crown's second wave was the 5 riders, and they came hard, and they meant to run him down. Arzan reached the pines and went to ground between 2 trunks whose roots had grown together over the years. He was hidden from the line of sight. He was in a place where a horse could not charge without breaking its leg on the stone. The riders pulled up 20 yards short and began, very carefully, to dismount. One of them, who was Crown's cousin Jeb, slid off his horse and said, through his teeth, "We'll find him and we'll gut him like a spring ewe." He said it the way you say a thing you have said before. He was the kind of man who said cruel things to remind himself that he could. The next hour was a strange kind of war. Crown's men tried the stone shelf. They tried to go around it. They tried to flush him into the open with a burning brand tied to a wet hide, the way you flush a coyote out of a draw. None of it worked. Arzan moved through the pines the way he moved through a flock, reading the ground, reading the wind, reading what a man could and could not see. The staff did not need him to swing it. The staff was an arm, and the arm did what arms do. By dusk, 2 of Crown's men had broken legs on the stone. A third had lost an eye to the hook of the staff when he had come within reach. Crown himself had not moved from his horse. He had watched, and he was, in his own quiet way, impressed. He said, very softly, to no one in particular, "This was not a man to send a letter to. This was a man you should have left alone." But Crown was not the kind of man who left anyone alone. He was the kind who waited. As the light went, he sent 2 riders south, fast, toward the settlement north of the Humboldt. They were going for Elena. Elena Mesa had run the small trading post at the edge of that settlement for 11 years. She had run it with her husband, who had been a quiet man with a quiet laugh. That laugh had ended in February of 1886, when 3 of Crown's riders had come up from the valley looking for a calf that had wandered, and had found her husband instead, and had beaten him to death over a misunderstanding that Crown had never bothered to correct. Elena had buried him under a juniper near the back of the trading post lot. She had run the post alone for a year and a half. She had gotten smaller with the loneliness, as if grief took matter out of a person and left only the brittle frame. She was not brittle, though. She was steel-wrapped in a calico dress. She was standing behind her counter, with the winter lamp already lit and the door not yet locked, when the 2 riders came up. They came in the easy way of men who had been told that everything they touched belonged to them. They said they needed flour and ammunition. They said they needed it for a man up on the high meadow. They said, by the way, get on a horse and come out with us, because the boss wants to make sure you see what is about to happen to the foreigner and his flock. Elena understood everything in a single breath. The riders were going to destroy Arzan. They were going to make sure she was there to watch, because she had refused to sell her lot of land to Crown twice. They were going to use one to break the other. That was the way Crown had always worked. She said, in the voice she had used for her husband when he was alive, "Show me your money first." The riders laughed. She took out from under the counter a small navy pistol she had kept wrapped in her husband's shirt for 16 months. She did not raise it. She put it on the counter, square and clean, and the lamp caught it the way a mirror catches the moon. She said, "Get out." The riders looked at each other. They had been told to bring the woman. They had not been told to die for her. They left. They went back up the trail toward the high meadow. Elena locked the door and stood with her back against it. The gun stayed in her hand. She had been alone for 16 months. She had been getting smaller for 16 months. Tonight, for the first time since her husband had died, she was getting larger. If something is moving in you right now, you are exactly who we are telling this story for. A like and a subscribe tells us to keep going. We are almost there. The dawn is close. She saddled her husband's old roan mare, the one she had been afraid to ride since the funeral. She rode north, toward the sheriff's office, toward a man she had not spoken to since her husband's name had been carved into the wood of the courthouse message board. Sheriff Bram Tuller had been Crown's man in 1886. He had come to her husband's funeral with a hat in his hand and had said nothing. He had gone back to Crown. He had taken Crown's money. But Bram had also, in the 17 months since, lost his son to the same fever that had been moving along the river. He had buried his boy in the same cemetery as Elena's husband, on the same hill, under different trees. Elena rode into the settlement at full gallop. She went to the sheriff's office. She kicked the door open. She put the navy pistol on Bram's desk. She said, "If you are Crown's man tonight, shoot me now and be done with it. If you are not, then get your horse and ride with me, because 2 men are about to die." Bram looked at her. He looked at the gun. He looked at the pistol the way you look at a word from your own dead wife. He reached under his desk. He took out his badge. He had not been wearing it since the funeral. He put it back on. He walked out of his office. They reached the high meadow at the first edge of dawn. Arzan was still on his feet. He was at the north end of the pines, the staff in his hand, the hook dark with the sweat of the men he had held off. Crown had pulled his remaining men back to the south end of the meadow, and there was 100 yards of open ground between the two of them. Crown was sitting on his gray horse, the way a man sits when he has decided he is no longer interested in what is in front of him. The first thing Elena saw, when they came over the last rise, was Arzan. The second thing she saw was Tomás's body near the door of the hut. She did not say anything. She held the reins of her mare and watched. She said, quietly, to Bram, "Get down and go talk to Mr. Crown. Tell him he is under arrest for rustling and for being a man." Bram looked at her. He almost laughed. Bram dismounted. He walked toward Crown's line. He did not draw his pistol. He walked like a man who had been a sheriff long before Crown had bought him. He said, "Hollis, you and your men are going to put your rifles on the ground. You are going to do it because of the law, and because the woman behind me has asked me to do this, and because somewhere under that big coat you are wearing there is a man who is going to die sooner than he thought." Crown did not put the rifles down. He was the kind of man who did not do that easily. But he did not raise them either. He sat very still. Bram turned his horse. He cantered back to Elena. He said, very quietly, "He is not putting the rifles down." She said, "Then we will make him." She rode, alone, to the south end of the meadow. Crown's men, who had been told to watch the foreigner, watched the woman instead. She stopped 20 feet from Crown's horse. She looked up at him. She said, in a voice that did not rise, "You killed my husband. You killed my husband's name in this valley. You killed the foreigner inside your own head when you decided he was smaller than you. You killed the boy that Mr. Eizaguirre buried 2 years ago, in a grave in Carson City his father's money paid for." She said, "You have been killing people you have never met for 20 years. She said, "You are going to get off your horse now. You are going to put the rifles down. You are going to walk into the sheriff's hand. You are going to do it tonight, because there is no longer any version of you that has not lost." Crown sat on the horse for a long time. He did the math a man like Crown always does. He looked at the foreigner's flock, at the sheriff's badge that was once his, at the woman whose husband he had killed, at the pines where his 2 men had broken legs. He had not bought this day. He had been given it. He dismounted. He put his rifle on the ground. He walked into Bram Teller. Elena almost laughed. She did not. She said, instead, very quietly, so quietly that only Bram could hear it, "My husband fed you bread once, and you have never paid for it." Crown's mouth went tight, but he did not answer. Bram took Crown and Crown's men into the settlement. Within the year, Bram had built an arrest record Crown could not buy his way out of. Within 2 years, Crown had lost every water right south of the valley. Within 3 years, his name had been removed from the tin roof over the courthouse by men with hammers and a long memory. Tomás was buried under a pinyon near the back of the trading post's lot, near the place where Elena's husband lay. There were 2 heads there now, instead of 1. Arzan would come and stand at the foot of both graves. He would stand there for a long time. He would not pray out loud. He would not speak in the old language. He would stand very still, and the staff would lean against the fence post behind him, and his hand would rest on the wood the way a man rests his hand on the open palm of someone he has stopped being afraid of. His hand had held the staff 10,000 nights. It had learned how to hold a hand, too. It took some time, but it learned. 12 years later, in the autumn of 1899, Arzan Eizaguirre married Elena Mesa on the porch of the trading post. The wood of the porch came from the same pinyon ridge where he had made his stand. The staff leaned beside the door, and Elena's hand rested on it during the vows, as if to thank it for what it had done on the night her husband had been killed and a stranger had stood in the dark for both of them. Their flock, by then, was not his alone. It was theirs. Their grandchildren were already learning the old language, from the mouth of someone who loved them, in a kitchen that smelled like pine resin and coffee. The high meadow was the last open ground in the valley that had not been fenced. They had left it open. They had left it for the wind, and for the sheep, and for whatever new boy or girl would one day climb up there alone with a long hazel staff and understand that the world has never been as big as the people with the most money say it is. On the morning of their wedding, Elena set a small enamel cup of coffee on the porch rail. Arzan lifted the staff and set it beside the cup. He said, in the old language, in the language their grandchildren would one day speak in this kitchen, that the staff and the cup had a quarrel that could not be settled, and that he was going to spend the rest of his life letting the woman in front of him decide who was right. Elena laughed. It was the kind of laugh a woman laughs when she has been made larger by a man who has decided she deserves the room. Arzan heard it, and he set the staff down gently, and he did not pick it up for the rest of the day. The door of the trading post was open. The wind off the high meadow came through it like a letter from a friend who had, finally, finished writing. Next, we will tell the story of a mute woman who answered an advertisement for a wife on a Montana cattle station in 1883, only to discover the man waiting at the train was not the man who had placed the advertisement. We will see you there.